Have you ever found yourself wondering if you should leave your church? It's a tough question to ask, and it can bring up all sorts of emotions and uncertainty and sometimes even frustrations. And I've been a pastor now for 12 years, and in my time, I've seen countless people wrestle with this decision. And for a variety of reasons. Some are valid, others are less so, and many simply disappear without saying a word. But here's the reality. Leaving a church isn't inherently bad. In fact, most Christians at some point will go through this process because God doesn't always call us to be in the same place forever. But the hard part is figuring out when is the right time to leave your church. And that's what we're going to unpack today. I want to share with you 8 clear signs that it's time to leave your church, and just as important, 5 ways that you can leave your church well. Let's take a look. Now, as we look through this list, I would encourage you before you do anything to spend time in prayer. The decision to leave a church should be one that you don't make on your own, but rather you seek God's wisdom in. Also, I want to encourage you to leave a comment, letting me know your thoughts and share what you're going through. So, with that in mind, let's look at the first reason that you should leave a church, and that is that the gospel is not being taught. If you're attending a church that's not teaching that salvation is found in Jesus alone, it's time to leave. And sadly today, many churches aren't preaching the gospel. They center around something else, such as money or power or fame, or just wanting people to feel good about their lives. And these things overshadow the gospel message. In other churches, they teach a heretical message that salvation can be found outside of Jesus. But either way, the gospel isn't being taught. You see, churches, what they teach should center around what Jesus has done for us and how we should be living in light of that. And if the one you're attending is not, you should leave. The second reason you should leave your church is if the church isn't doing anything for those outside. You see, churches should have a balance between growing the spiritual depth of the members and loving those who are far from Jesus. But what often happens is this balance becomes out of whack, and churches only care about those inside their walls. And if your church's sole focus is on those inside the walls, it's time to change. Any church that focuses only on their members will inevitably become sick and die because the church was never meant to be exclusive, but inclusive. And this responsibility not only lies on the church, but also on you as well. The church should be training those on the inside to go outside. So find a place that helps you grow in your faith and that encourages you to reach those around you. Now, the third reason you should consider leaving your church is if you haven't found community, but you've tried. See, as a pastor, I often encounter people who complain about not being connected with people in the church. Sometimes that's legitimate. For a variety of reasons, they've never connected. But I often, when I dig a little deeper, what I find is they haven't actually really tried. They've never attended community events. They've never tried a small group. They've never put any effort into talking with anybody. And the reality is community is a two-way street. It takes effort on both parties. Of course, the church takes responsibility in this, but you do too. So if you've tried to find community and haven't, it might be a sign that it's time to leave your church. The fourth reason you should consider leaving is if there's an abuse in power. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for the leadership within a church to get consumed by their own pursuit of power, that they end up abusing the position that God has put them in. And there's a lot of heartbreaking stories of spiritual, emotional, and sometimes even physical abuse that have taken place inside churches. And if you're in a church that's abusing its power, twisting the gospel for their own benefit, making demands, or even using the Bible to hold people down, get out. Now, there's a difference between making a mistake and abusing power. Every church is full of broken people, and there's bound to be a few messes, and that includes the leaders. Making one mistake isn't a big deal. A pattern of abuse is. So if you're in a church where they're abusing leadership, where there's no accountability for the lead pastor, it's time to leave your church. And the fifth reason to consider leaving is if you don't agree with the vision. Now, every church has or should have a vision. This sets the direction that they are going and establishes their unique identity. Their vision is what God has given them and specifically called them to do. And one of the most beautiful parts of the church is when each church understands its unique role. And together, each church makes up the body of Christ and plays a different role. This means that each church will look and feel a little bit different, play a slightly different role in the overarching mission of the church, and that's a good thing. But that also means that you won't fit in at every church because each church is different. And let me be clear, these differences aren't necessarily right or wrong, they're just different. So if you don't agree with the direction your church is going, that's fine. Find one that you can get behind. That's the beauty of having so many unique churches, is that each one will make an impact in a different way. So find one that has the vision that fits the gifts that God has given you. The sixth reason that you should consider leaving your church is if you don't trust the church with your money. If you can't trust the church with your money, you shouldn't give them your time. Giving to a church is kind of like making an investment. If you shifted your 401k to a new broker and they wouldn't tell you where your money was going, you would probably pull that out fast. And when you give to a church, you are making a kingdom investment. And if you regularly give and attend the church, you should know where your money is going and how it's being used. You should see returns on your investment. And when a church has closed books and doesn't share what they're doing with their tithes and their offerings, that should be a red flag. Now, in some cases, you don't need to know all the details. For example, the salaries of the staff are often lumped into one line item. And you can see the total amount being given, but you don't know what an individual makes. But as a whole, you should know where your money is going, and you should trust the church. And if your church is unwilling to show you where your money is going, or you don't trust the church to benefit God's kingdom, then it's time to consider changing churches. The seventh reason that you should consider leaving your church is if church politics have taken over the pursuit of Jesus. Now, the church is messy because they let people like you and me in the doors, and wherever two or more people are gathered, there's bound to be some issues. And every church has had or will have issues. There's no such thing as a perfect church. However, there are some churches where politics have taken over everything else. And if your church is all about church politics or drama or he said, she said, it might be time to look for a new church. And typically this happens when a church abandons their God-given mission and becomes more interested in individual preferences. It's a clear sign that the church is dying. So if church politics have overtaken the pursuit of Jesus in your church, it's time to leave. And the last reason you might consider leaving your church is if there's no place for you to use your skills and gifts. God has given you a unique set of skills and passions. You were created on purpose and for a purpose. And the church should have a way for you to use those gifts. You see, being a Christian isn't a spectator sport, and going to church isn't a consumer activity. It requires participation. And that means that you should find ways to use your gifts to benefit the church and those around you. If your church doesn't have a place or isn't willing to let you use your skills, it might be a sign that your church doesn't need you, or that you don't fit in with the vision that they've given. And it might be time to consider finding a new church. The above list isn't an exhaustive list, but I hope that it helped identify a few reasons that you might consider leaving your church, a few reasons that you can take to God and pray for wisdom. And now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how you can leave your church well. Because most people simply slip out the back door. But I want to encourage you to take a different path. It's more difficult, but I think it's better in the long run. So here's 5 things that you should do before leaving your church. And the first one is this: check your motives. You see, changing churches should never be something we do on a whim. And the first thing we should do is to check our heart and our motives. Why do you want to leave your church? Be honest. Are you leaving for good reasons, or is there something else going on in your heart? You see, sometimes we can deceive ourselves into thinking that we're doing the right thing, but in reality, we're doing it for selfish reasons. So spend some time checking your motives and asking God for wisdom. Use the above list as signs on how you might know it's time to leave and help you discern if you should. The second thing that you should do to leave a church well is to ask somebody outside the church. Get an outsider's perspective from a godly person you can trust. It can be easy to deceive ourselves, so sometimes we need the input of others to help us see our blind spots. Find someone you trust and tell them why you're considering changing churches and what you plan to do. See what they see. It's likely that they'll have a unique perspective that will help you. And really, this is just a good life principle. When we need help in life, ask others to help us navigate it so that we can make wise decisions. And the third thing you can do to leave your church well is to tell somebody inside the church. Now, I've been a pastor for a little over 12 years, and there's been a lot of people that have left the churches I've been a part of, and the vast majority of them leave without ever saying a word. They just disappear. And listen, I get it, it's awkward, but I think it's needed. Have a healthy and respectful conversation. Don't leave without talking to the pastor or the people you were connected with. And one caveat to this is if you're in an abusive church, just leave. You should not have a conversation with the people who are abusing their power. But if you're in a healthy church, tell the pastor you're leaving. Be honest. Don't sugarcoat it or avoid the conversation because it's awkward. Be honest and share with them why you are leaving. When you're telling people you're leaving, give them the real reason. It doesn't help anybody if you don't tell the whole truth. Now, you can say it in a respectful way, but still say it. And again, I know this is difficult. I know it's hard to speak up on the issues you're facing, but remember, the church is the bride of Christ, so treat her respectfully and be honest. And the fourth thing that we can do to leave well is to leave with grace. While I've seen many people leave the church without saying a word, I've also seen a lot of people who go online or go to their friends or go in the community and bash the church or bash somebody in the church. They will never say a word to your face, but they have no problem highlighting the church's faults publicly. This is not helpful. It's not edifying. It's not good for you or the church. Remember, the church is the bride of Christ, so treat her with respect and grace. When you insult the church, you're ultimately insulting Jesus. Now, I know you might be frustrated, hurt, and disappointed. You probably have a good reason to feel the way that you do, but I want to encourage you to take the high road. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Ask yourself, in 10 years, what will I wish I had done? And this is a great question for all aspects of our life, but especially as we are considering leaving our church. What will you wish you would have done? How will you have wished you would have left? And the fifth way that we can leave a church well is to find a new church. The reality is many people get so focused on leaving their church that they never think about going and finding another one. And if you're leaving the church, your top priority should be finding a church that you fit in. The reality is your best shot of following Jesus is when you have a few people in your life. You see, the Christian life isn't meant to be done in isolation. In fact, I would say it's impossible. So find a place where you can plug in and commit to that church. And remember, you don't go to church, you are the church. So find a place where you can grow, serve, love, give, and experience the transformation that Jesus has for you. So, if you're thinking about leaving your church, consider the things on this list with lots of prayer. Seek God's wisdom. Ask those around you. Don't make this decision on a whim or in search of greener pastures. And if you end up leaving, think about how you can leave a church well. Do what is loving and gracious and not out of malice. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it encouraged you to leave your church well and gave you some insight on reasons you might consider leaving. If it did, would you leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts and your experience with leaving your church? And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on future content that's coming out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.